A hierarchy is a parent-child relationship. Much like a solar system where you have the sun, you have some planets revolving around the sun. Now those planets are the child of that sun, which makes that sun parent of those planets. Now some of these planets may have some moons, which makes those moons child of those planets. It also makes those planets parents of those moons. Another example of that is to take a look at a tree in the wind. So the leaves themselves are child of some twigs. Those twigs are the child of some smaller branches. Now, those smaller branches are also child of bigger branches, and then the bigger branches are also the child of the trunk. Now, the tree itself is a child of the world it lives in or the ground underneath it. If you take a look at the outliner on the top right here and actually expand that a little, right, you have another example of a hierarchy or a parent-child relationship. You have the scene collection, and inside there you have two other collections, one called set, one called tree. Now if you expand those child of the scene collection also have their own childs, which are the objects inside them. So each of these collections are parents as well. Now most objects do have some sort of tiny hierarchy inside them, even polygonal object, depending on the modifiers that you're using, as well as if you're using vertex groups. But the only object that has an actual hierarchy that you can edit around and move around and control pretty much at will is the armature. And that hierarchy consists of bones. So again, it's a parent-child relationship. So you have a root bone, which is the trunk, and then you have a bunch of child that are connected to one another. Now, depending on how they branch off, some of these are connected at the same bone. All right, so it makes a very complex parent-child relationship. Now, each of these bones have a local coordinate system in relation to one another. So one moves, the other one moves, anything that is connected with it will move. A simpler way to look at it is to open up a brand new Blender scene with the default cube and put the axes on. So you have the general X, Y, and Z of the scene, which is the global coordinate. And then you have each objects in the scene which have their own local coordinate system. An easy way to demonstrate that is to put the gizmo on and make sure that the transform orientation are set to local, and grab an object like the cube and give it a rotation and move it in the world. You will notice here that the numbers have changed and the rotation have changed. And then this also affects the scale. All right. Now you will notice that we have dimension here. Dimension is pretty much imagine a box around it. So the bounding box in the scene is the actual dimension of the object within the scene. So think of it as a box. All right. So this is basically the real size of the object in the scene. All right. So another thing that you might have a question for is the delta transform here. So why is there another transform and why is it all zeroed out? Now, the delta transform is particularly useful in animation. It's an extra set of transform that you can use on top of keyed animation. So if you need, you have an animation that you did, but you need to change it in the world, well, you don't have to edit your animation. You can use the delta transform to actually make those extra changes, and it will just make your life easier. But those are really, really useful in terms of animation. But when you're dealing with rigging, you won't necessarily deal with delta transform that has to do with the world. All right, so just keep that in mind. Now, let's actually reset this. So Alt S, Alt R, and Alt G will clear the rotation, location, and scale of the object. Now let's duplicate that a few times to create our own hierarchy. So if I select these two cubes that I duplicated with the Shift D and Shift select the last cube or this middle cube and press Ctrl P and choose Object, now I've created a parent-child relationship. These two cubes are now the child of this cube. So if I move it around, rotate it around, and scale it about, they will follow. But they do both have their own local axis as well. Now this one could be parented to that one, so Control P, so which expands that parent-child relationship or parent-child relationship tree. All right. So it's really important to understand the local versus global coordinate system. Simply because when you're dealing with an armature and a rig, in certain cases you will need extra controls. And these extra control, you're doing them by using constraint and drivers. And more often than not, you will be required to specify if you want the local or the global coordinate system to be affected. The values in the location as well as rotation and scaled field don't necessarily reflect the child's true position in the global environment. That's due to the cumulative effect of the parental location as well as scale and rotation. So when I move this around, the global space is not what is reflected here. This is the local space. So if I unparent this by pressing Alt-P and choose clear parent, you will notice that it keeps the same number, but the object jumps in the world space of these values. So if I undo this and I press Alt-P and then choose clear and keep transform, then you will notice that the numbers change to reflect the true values in the global world.